The champagne flutes were already filled when my mother stood up and tapped hers with a dessert spoon. 25 years. My parents had been married 25 years, and my mother wanted everyone in that private dining room to know exactly how that anniversary was going to be paid for. "Before we toast," she said, smiling at the table of relatives, like she was about to announce something delightful, "I want to acknowledge the person who made tonight possible." She looked at me. Not my husband, not my brother, me. "Our daughter has generously agreed to cover this evening." I had agreed to no such thing. I felt my husband's hand find mine under the table. He'd heard the same thing I had, past tense, fait accompli, already decided. My mother had called me 3 weeks earlier, asking if I could help out a little with the anniversary dinner. I'd said I would contribute something reasonable. Somewhere between that phone call and this moment, something reasonable had become the entire bill for 31 people. At a restaurant I would never have chosen, eating food I hadn't ordered, celebrating a milestone that somehow had become my financial responsibility. My name is June Calloway. I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed physical therapist with a private practice I built from scratch after 7 years of work that included 2 associate positions, 1 failed partnership, and more early mornings than I can count. I am not wealthy by any stretch. I am comfortable because I am disciplined. And for as long as I can remember, my family has treated those 2 things, discipline and comfort, as resources they were entitled to draw from whenever they needed. My brother, sitting 2 seats down, didn't look up from his bread roll. His name doesn't matter as much as what he represents. The reason every family financial emergency eventually circles back to me. He's 35. He's had 4 jobs in the past 6 years, none of which he held for longer than 14 months. He's been through 1 bankruptcy, 1 eviction, and 1 situation involving a business loan that my father described as a rough patch, and that cost my parents $40,000 they didn't technically have but found somewhere. He is not a bad person. He is a person who has never once been allowed to hit the ground, so he has never learned what the ground feels like. I paid for his first security deposit when he moved to Portland. I covered 2 months of his car insurance when he said he was between paychecks. I lent him $1,100 once, for what he said was a medical bill, and when I gently asked about repayment 8 months later, my mother told me I was being cold. That was 3 years ago. The dinner carried on. My aunt made a toast. My uncle told the same story about my parents' first apartment that he tells at every gathering. My brother laughed at the right moments. I smiled. I held my husband's hand. And the whole time, I was doing math in my head, looking at the menu prices I hadn't agreed to. The wine that had already been opened, the appetizer spread that nobody had asked me about. When the check came, my mother slid it toward me across the white tablecloth without breaking her conversation. $862. I looked at it for a long moment. My husband looked at it. Then I looked at my mother, who was still talking to my aunt, and I understood something clearly for the first time in a way I hadn't before. Not that she was manipulative, I'd known that, but that she had no idea she was. This was simply how things worked in her mind. I earned, therefore I paid. The logic was as natural to her as breathing. I put the check holder down, stood up, and excused myself to the restroom. I didn't go to the restroom. I stood in the hallway near the hostess stand and called the restaurant's front desk from my cell phone. I asked to speak with the manager on duty. I explained, very calmly, that there had been a misunderstanding about who was authorizing payment for the private dining room that evening. I asked her to please hold the check and not run any card until I returned to the table. She was confused, but she agreed. When I walked back in, I sat down, folded my napkin in my lap, and waited. My mother eventually noticed the check hadn't been taken. She glanced toward the back of the restaurant, then at me. "Did you already give them your card?" she asked. "No," I said. A pause. "Well, they're going to need it." "I'm sure they will," I said, and picked up my water glass. She laughed, the kind of laugh that's really a warning. "June." "Mom." My brother finally looked up. My father cleared his throat and said, very quietly, "This isn't the time." "I agree," I said. "It wasn't the time 3 weeks ago when I was told I'd help out a little, and it definitely wasn't the time tonight when you told 30 people I was covering this dinner before asking me." The table had gone very still. My aunt pretended to check something on her phone. My cousin studied his napkin. My mother's expression shifted. "We'll talk about this at home." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, not unkindly, just clearly. I'm happy to cover my husband's meal and mine. I'm not covering the rest. She stared at me. In 32 years, I had never said anything like that at a family event. I had always found a way to smooth it over, write the check, and have the argument in private later where it would be dismissed. My father paid the bill. He was furious, quietly, in the way he gets furious, jaw tight, eyes somewhere above my head. Nobody said much in the parking lot. My brother left quickly with a vague excuse about needing to get home. On the drive back, my husband said, "You okay?" "I don't know yet," I told him honestly. I was about to find out. The calls started the next morning. My mother first, then my father, and this one surprised me, though it shouldn't have, my brother. My mother's message was long and wounded. She talked about how embarrassing it had been, how she couldn't believe I would do something like that in front of the entire family, how this wasn't who she raised me to be. She used the word selfish. Twice. She said I had ruined their anniversary. My father's was shorter and angrier. "You made your mother cry. Call her." My brother's was different. He didn't mention the dinner at all. He just said, "Hey, call me when you get a chance." Kind of urgent. I knew what urgent meant. It had always meant one thing. I didn't call him back that day. I went to work, saw 6 patients, came home, made dinner with my husband, and sat with the strange, unfamiliar feeling of having done something I couldn't undo. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like standing at the edge of something and realizing the ground behind me had already shifted. The next morning, I called my brother back. He needed $3,000. His landlord had started eviction proceedings, and he had 30 days to either pay the back rent or vacate. He'd already asked my parents. They'd given him what they could, $800. But it wasn't enough. He was calling in what he called a favor. I started. I know, he said quickly. But I'm really asking. I'll pay you back by March. It was October. I asked him what happened to his job. He said he'd left it in August. It wasn't a good environment, he said. I'm looking. I have some leads. I asked him what he'd been living on for 2 months. He said, Mom and Dad had been helping. I asked him if he had any savings. He paused just a beat too long. I told him I needed to think about it and I'd let him know. He thanked me in that practiced way that meant he already expected yes. I sat at my kitchen table after I hung up and thought about March. I thought about the $1,100 that was never repaid. I thought about the security deposit I'd never asked to be returned. I thought about every time I had said yes, because the alternative, the silence, the withdrawal, the implication that I didn't love them enough, felt worse than the dollar amount. And then I thought about the anniversary dinner, the way the check had slid across the tablecloth, the way she hadn't even looked at me when she did it. I didn't call him back with an answer that day. Instead, I opened my laptop and started going through my files. I found it on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after my brother's call, while I was looking for something else entirely. It was a document I'd half forgotten about. About 14 months earlier, my brother had asked me to co-sign a personal loan. He'd framed it as a minor thing, a formality. The lender just needed a second name for what he called credit verification purposes. My father had told me on the phone that it was standard procedure, and that I wouldn't be on the hook for anything, that my brother had a solid repayment plan, and this was just to help him get approved at a better rate. I had signed it. I sat there Tuesday evening actually reading what I had signed, the full document this time, not the highlighted signature here version my brother had emailed me. 14 pages. I read all 14. I was not a co-signer in name only. I was a co-borrower. Equal liability. In the event of default, the lender had the right to pursue me directly for the full remaining balance without first exhausting collection efforts against the primary borrower. The loan was for $18,000. My brother had made 4 payments. His last payment was 7 months ago. The account, according to the loan servicer's statements I found attached to a forwarded email I'd never opened, was 93 days delinquent. I read that number 3 times. 93 days delinquent. My name on the account, my credit, my assets, my business potentially on the line for a loan I had been told was just a formality. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a while. I want to tell you I cried. I didn't. What I felt was something colder and much more focused than crying. It was the feeling of finally understanding a situation completely, without the softening layer of wanting to believe the best. For the first time, I wasn't asking myself what I owed my family. I was asking myself what it was going to cost me if I kept paying. My husband found me there when he came home from his shift. He sat down across from me, looked at my face, and said, "What happened?" I showed him the document. He read it quietly. Then he said 3 words, "We need lawyers." I did not tell my family what I'd found. I went to work the next morning. I called a consumer law attorney from my car before my first patient. I explained the situation. She was not surprised in the way that told me she'd heard versions of this story before. She told me what my options were, what the timeline looked like, and what I should and should not do in the meantime. The first thing she told me not to do was contact the lender without her. The second thing she told me not to do was give my brother any more money. The third thing was harder. She said I needed to stop any automatic or informal transfers I had set up for family members, because in certain circumstances, continued voluntary payments could complicate my legal position. I had a Venmo recurring transfer to my mother for $200 a month. I'd set it up 18 months ago. My mother had mentioned offhandedly that her utility bills were getting higher, and I'd offered without thinking about it. $200 a month for 18 months. She had never mentioned it, never thanked me for it, and I had honestly half forgotten it existed until the attorney mentioned it. I canceled it that afternoon. My attorney sent a letter to the loan servicer on my behalf, disputing the terms of my co-borrower status and requesting the full account history. She also advised me to document every financial transaction I could find going back 5 years, dates, amounts, purposes, any communications around them. I spent a weekend doing exactly that. Venmo history, bank statements, text messages where money had been discussed, emails. 7 years of my adult life laid out in a spreadsheet line by line. Security deposit for my brother's first apartment, car insurance, the $1,100 for a medical bill, a hotel stay I'd covered when he was passing through and had no cash, the cosign I should never have signed. The total, not counting the outstanding co-borrower liability, was just over $22,000. $22,000 that would never be categorized as a loan, that no one in my family would ever acknowledge as a debt, because in their framing it had never been borrowed, it had been owed. My mother called on a Thursday asking why the Venmo transfer hadn't come through. I told her I'd stopped it. A silence. "Then, is this about the dinner?" "It's about a lot of things," I said. Her voice cooled in that way it does when she's deciding how hard to push. "You're being dramatic, June." "I'm being careful," I said. "There's a difference." She told me I was hurting the family. She told me that this wasn't what adults did, that adults talked things out, that she couldn't believe after everything they'd sacrificed for me I was choosing money over my own parents. She said my brother was in a desperate situation, and that if something happened to him, if things got really bad, I would have to live with that. I let her finish. Then I said very quietly, "I know about the loan." The silence that followed was different from the other silences. This one had weight. "What loan?" she said, but the question came out half a second too slow. "The one I co-signed," I said. "The one that's 93 days delinquent with my name on it. The one where I'm equally liable for $18,000. She said it wasn't as serious as it sounded. She said my brother had a plan. She said my father had been handling it. I let her talk. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue about anymore. When she finished, I told her that I had retained an attorney. I told her that I wasn't going to discuss the specifics on the phone. I told her that I loved her, because I did even then, and that I would be in touch. I ended the call. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than anything else about that afternoon. They came to the house on a Sunday. Both of them, no warning, no text. My mother had her coat buttoned all the way up, even though it wasn't cold. My father stood slightly behind her in the doorway, which meant she was the one who'd pushed for this, and he'd come along because he didn't know how to stop her once she had a direction. My husband was home. I asked him to stay in the other room. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew my parents would perform differently if we had an audience. My mother walked in and immediately started talking about my brother. He hadn't slept. He was falling apart. He was asking for her every hour. She was scared for him. She used the word fragile 4 times in the first 2 minutes. I sat down. I didn't offer them coffee. "What do you actually need from me right now?" I asked. She blinked, slightly thrown off that I wasn't reacting to the fragile. "We need you to stop this," she said. "Call off whatever lawyer thing you're doing. Your brother needs help, real help, not you making everything worse." "I'm not making anything worse," I said. "I'm making sure the situation I was put in without my full understanding doesn't cost me my practice, my home, or my credit." My father finally spoke. Nobody is going to come after your practice. The lender has that right under the terms of the document I signed, I said. I've confirmed that with an attorney. He shook his head slowly, like I was being naive, which almost made me laugh. Your brother made a mistake, my mother said. He's trying to fix it. What's his plan? I asked. She hesitated. He's working on it. Does he have a job? Another hesitation. So the plan is me, I said. She didn't answer that, which was its own answer. I looked at my mother for a long moment. She was looking back at me with an expression I'd seen my whole life. Disappointment held just at the surface, ready to become wounded if I pushed any further. For 32 years, that expression had been enough to make me recalibrate, apologize, find a softer way to say the hard thing. I didn't find a softer way this time. I have loved you my whole life, I told her. I have also paid for things my whole life. And somewhere along the way, those two things got tangled up in a way that wasn't fair to me. I'm not asking you to agree with that. But I'm not untangling myself from a legal obligation just because the conversation is uncomfortable. My father exhaled sharply. So that's it. You're choosing a lawyer over your family. I'm choosing to not be financially destroyed, I said. That's not the same thing. They left. My father first, then my mother, who paused at the door and said, I hope you know what you're doing. For the first time in a long time, I told her I do. My attorney negotiated a modification of the co-borrower agreement over the following 6 weeks. It required documentation, letters, my brother's acknowledgement of the delinquency, and ultimately a restructured loan that removed my direct liability in exchange for a one-time payment, significantly less than the outstanding balance that I made through my attorney's office. It was not cheap. It was less expensive than the alternative. My brother called me once during those 6 weeks. He didn't call about the loan. He called to ask if I was really going to do this to him. I asked him what he meant by this. He said, you know what I mean. I said, I think you mean hold you accountable for your own debt. He hung up before I finished the sentence. My parents went quiet after the Sunday visit. Not the wounded quiet I was used to, where silence was deployed as punishment, until I reached out and smoothed things over. This was different. This was the quiet of people recalibrating, figuring out how to approach something that hadn't moved when they pushed it. I didn't reach out. I went to work. I saw my patients. I had dinner with my husband. I went on a hike with a friend I'd been canceling on for 2 years because there was always some family, something that needed handling first. The hike was on a Saturday morning in November. The trail went up through a state park about 40 minutes from our house. And at the top there was a view of the reservoir that was genuinely beautiful in the cold, the water flat and pewter-colored, the tree line bare. My friend and I stood there for a while not saying much, just looking. She'd known me through most of the past decade. She knew the shape of my family without needing the details. After a while she said, you seem different. Different how? She thought about it. Less braced, she said. I didn't know how to explain that I'd been braced for so long I'd forgotten it was something I was doing. That I'd been holding myself slightly tense for years, always half ready for the next call, the next need, the next situations where saying no would cost more emotionally than saying yes. That somewhere in the past 2 months I had set that down, not in anger, not in some dramatic declaration, just set it down. I stopped waiting to be needed, I told her. It was the closest I could get to the truth. My parents reached out in December, not a confrontation this time. My mother sent a text that said she'd been thinking about things and that she'd like to talk when I was ready. It was 3 sentences, which for her was restrained. My father sent a separate text that just said he was sorry things had gotten so complicated. I read both messages. I didn't respond right away. I was not cold. I was not playing a strategy. I was genuinely sitting with the question of what I wanted from my family, now that I had some distance. Now that the acute part was over, I still loved them. That had never been the issue. But love had been doing a lot of work in my family, covering over things that should have been named, softening the edges of things that should have stayed sharp. I responded to my mother after a few days. I told her I was open to talking, but that I wanted to do it somewhere outside either of our homes, and I wanted it to be just the 2 of us. She agreed, which surprised me a little. We met at a coffee shop on a Wednesday afternoon. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with her hands wrapped around a mug, looking older than I expected somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing her without the armor of a family gathering around her. We talked for almost 2 hours. It wasn't a resolution. There was no moment where everything became clear and understood. But she said something about halfway through that I've thought about many times since. She said I didn't know how much we were asking, I didn't think to count it. She didn't say it as an excuse. She said it like someone trying to be accurate. I believed her. I also knew that not knowing wasn't the same as it not happening. We left the coffee shop and walked to our cars in different directions. She texted me that night that she was glad we talked. I texted back that I was too. My brother and I haven't spoken since October. I don't know if that's permanent or temporary. I think of him sometimes when I pass his old neighborhood, or when my mother mentions him in passing, which she does less than she used to. I hope he finds his footing. I genuinely do. I know he won't find it the way he's been looking for it, with someone else's hand under him to break every fall. That's not kindness. It took me a long time to understand that. I'm not sure he's there yet. On New Year's Eve, my husband and I stayed home. We made dinner together, opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for no particular reason, and watched the city from our living room window while something quiet played in the background. At midnight, he poured 2 glasses and handed me one. "What are we toasting?" he asked. I thought about it. About the dinner in September, the check sliding across the white tablecloth. About my mother's voice on the phone saying, "You'll be covering this evening," like she was confirming something already agreed to. About the document I should have read before I signed it. About the attorney's office, the spreadsheet, the quiet Sunday when my parents left without the yes they'd come for. About the hike in November, the reservoir, the word my friend had used, less braced, to finally carrying just what's mine, I said. We touched glasses. The year turned over without ceremony, which was exactly what I needed it to do.